morning. I'd like to, hello, is this on? Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The time is 9 o'clock, and today is Thursday, December 12th, 2019. This is day one of a two-day meeting for the Physical Therapy Board of California, and we are meeting at the Department of Consumer Affairs in the hearing room located at 2005 Evergreen Street in Sacramento. Could we please have roll call?
Alicia Benaymet.
Here.
Jesus Dominguez.
Present.
Daniel Drummer.
Present.
Katerina Ellaby.
Present.
Tanya McMillian.
Present.
All members are present and the board has a quorum.
Thank you. And if we may just go ahead and go down the agenda and save agenda item number 3, closed session, for a little later after we take care of some items. Is that okay?
Madam President.
Yes? Oh,
Mission statement.
I'm sorry. I always get going. Dr. Drummer, do you have the mission statement handy?
I do.
Thank you.
Would you like me to read it?
I would love that. Thank you.
The mission statement of the Physical Therapy Board of California is to advance and protect the interests of the people of California by the effective administration of the Physical Therapy Practice Act.
Thank you. Okay. So, any objection from anyone for holding the closed session until a little later, or Mr. Kaiser, do you have any ideas about that?
Which would you like to take order-wise?
I would say just move down the agenda. But I'm also open to going into closed session.
I think there's 3 or 4 items for closed session that it's the pleasure of the board, really. It's up to you.
Any board member feel one way or the other?
My recall is that there might be up to 9 items.
Also, the only other thing that I'd add to it is the association reached out to me yesterday kind of asking what time they might come to show and provide attendance. And I think looking at the agenda, I kind of predicted a couple hours of closed session and advised around 11 o'clock. So if we take it too far out of order, I don't want to enter into closed session right when they get here.
Okay. And I guess there's always the possibility that closed session can run overtime as well.
You could.
Yeah.
We do have the opportunity of leaving closed session, coming back at a certain time, and then going back to closed session later. So if you want to do a certain chunk of time as closed session to start.
I'm open to that, and I think we don't have pressing issues, so I think that that'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move into closed session, and then plan on being back around 11 o'clock. Yeah? Thank you. Time is 11:27, and we are back on record from closed session. And we are going to move into agenda item number 5, the review and approval of the September meeting minutes.
So the September 2019 meeting minutes begin on page 8 of the meeting materials, and I'll go ahead and go through each page and ask the board for any edits. Were there any edits on page 8? Page 9?
Just a quick one, Brooke, if I, okay, I'm on page 9, line 55, adding San Francisco State University to the University of San Francisco. I think we want to say University of California, San Francisco, because USF is a private
Yes, thank you.
institution. That was it. Thank you.
Were there any additional edits on page 9? Page 10. Page 11.
Sorry, Brooke, I'm going to go back to page 10 if you don't mind. Line 93, just for consistency, is Blanca Rubio her full last name, or is that her full name?
I believe that's her full name. I think it's
It's 2 authors.
Oh, it's 2 authors.
Blanca and Rubio. But we can,
Yeah, like
let's
Amazon or
clarify that,
something.
yes. Mhm. Page 11. Page 12.
I have a comment on line 164 to 166. That first sentence is kind of worded strange. Maybe if we can go back and rewrite that.
Okay. Were there any additional edits on page 12? Page 13? Page 14? Page 15? Page 16? Page 17? Page 18? Page 19? Page 20? Page 21? Page 22? Page 23?
Yeah, the first sentence, Dr. Rabina Amen asked Ms. Conley approximately how many pocket licenses the board get returned. So maybe,
We'll reword that.
yeah.
Also going back to page 22, line 575, Ms. Conley responded that staff do attempt to is it do or does? I'm sorry.
Does staff- Does attempt.
Either way,
Either
I'm
way.
sure it could go, yeah.
Were there any additional edits on page 22? Page 23? Page 24? Page 25? Page 26? Page 27? Page 28?
Sorry, Brooke, on, just to clarify in my own mind, on line 826, the two sentences, Dr. Rabina Amen asked if the board receives complaints more frequently from consumers, staff, employers, or licensees. Ms. Ibarra responded that the board receives complaints from consumers, staff, employees, licensees, and other licensed individuals. I honestly can't remember if Elsa answered and she just sort of repeated. We receive complaints. I'm not sure if Dr. Rabina Amen got her question answered, or am I just overreading this?
No, I think it lacks an answer to the question as which one we receive more. I
Yeah,
think
and I'm
the
not
answer
sure.
at the time was that it's kind of hard to track,
Okay.
but it's pretty even keel across.
Perfect, thank you.
Were there any other edits on page 28? Moving on to page 29. Page 30. And that concludes the meeting minutes for the September meeting.
Thank you. Do you have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Ellaby to approve the minutes as amended and a second from Dr. Dominguez. Any further board discussion? And do we have any public comment? Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Alicia Ben-Amen,
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez,
Aye.
Daniel Drummer,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby,
Aye.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
5-0, motion carried.
Thank you. And we'll move to agenda item 6, the president's report for our 2020 proposed meeting calendar.
So I now have a conflict for the March meeting. I'd only be able to attend one day on the 25th. Are we going to have any quorum issues? Should we try to move the date? I defer to the president or legal counsel.
We need 4 of us. Is everyone else okay with those dates? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything that requires board action could be done potentially on the first day and then reports on the second day. And that would be fine if that's okay with you guys.
You have any comment, Mr. Kaiser?
My only concern is quorum. And so, you know, with the 2 current vacancies and having 1, we're right on that edge.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow a lot for kind of life circumstances and that kind of thing, the unforeseen. But aside from that, no, I'm comfortable.
I promise to try to not get hit by a vehicle crossing the street.
I appreciate that,
Look
Dr.
both
Nolan.
ways.
I will look both ways twice.
Yeah, it does make me a little nervous that if something should happen, we wouldn't be able to. I mean, what would happen if we didn't have 4 of us here? Just, you know, if that were the circumstances on either of those days.
You could still, Michael Canute's legal counsel, you can still take, certainly do reports, you can do informational items. You couldn't take action. But assuming everyone can attend, you still will have 5, and you still will have 4.
The next day. Okay.
The only thing that I'd add to it is we've secured dates, our location for those dates, and just kind of knowing how that process took place, I wouldn't be comfortable, you know, making a recommendation or making even offering as an option moving the dates forward a week or back a day or anything like that, because those dates were kind of hard to get as it was. Yeah.
Also, who knows, we could get another appointment between now and March, so
Hey,
what's to say?
you know, one can hope.
One can only hope, yeah.
What is the deadline for scheduling hearings if a hearing needed to be conducted? How much advance time does that need?
I think for we have to have an application by January.
Okay.
So, and as far as I know right now, I'm not aware of any potential petitioners at this point.
And just to clarify, Ms. Ellaby, you would be, right now, you're able to attend the 25th, but not the 26th?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other board comment on any of the other dates on the 2020 calendar? And we need to adopt this calendar, correct?
Correct.
So do we have a motion to adopt the calendar?
Motion to adopt the calendar.
Second.
Motion to adopt the calendar by Ms. McMillian and a second by Ms. Ellaby. Is there any further board discussion? And any public comment? Roll call vote, please.
Alicia Benayemet.
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez.
Aye.
Daniel Drummer.
Aye.
Katerina Ellaby.
Aye.
Tanya McMillian.
Aye.
5-0, motion carried to adopt the 2020 calendar.
Thank you. And then if we can all just take a peek at the proposed 2021 meeting calendar and see if anyone has any comments, any members?
The one thing that I noted, the June APTA next, I don't believe dates have been set. And the 2020 meeting will be in Phoenix. I don't know that the location for the 2021 has been established yet either.
Okay. Any other comment from the members? Okay. And no action needed on this. Any,
No, it's just informational planning purposes and logistics so we can get things done as soon as possible.
okay. Any public comment on the proposed 2021 meeting calendar? Okay. Thank you. And agenda item number 7, executive officers report.
So there are a few things that I wanted to kind of brief the board on. We'll start with administrative services. One, due to an unforeseen, well, I wouldn't say an unforeseen vacancy, but a vacancy created by retirement for Mr. Carl Nelson, the budget analyst within the administrative services program, who will be retiring in March. We are recruiting for his replacement because without him, we will not know what to do. Carl has been with the board for the better part of 2 decades, and he's served in many capacities, worked in just about every unit, and certainly worked with every unit, and has been instrumental in the board's success when it comes to keeping our ledgers managed and keeping us in the black instead of the red. Also very successful in attaining positions through BCP and creating the right criteria and telling the story to those powers that be that make those approvals. I want to say he's participated in 4 different sunset processes for this board, and has been a valuable resource for me, knowing that he's leaving, but knowing that we're also recruiting his position starting last week. Still causes me to lose a little sleep. But we just wanted to congratulate Carl on his upcoming retirement. We'll miss him dearly. And like I say to everybody that I have, fond affection for, you'll be back. Although I'm sure that he's going to enjoy his time, fishing and camping, and it will be really hard for me to lure him away from that. So.
Does the board have to approve his retirement?
Is that a motion?
It could be.
Carl,
Deny retirement.
Carl, would you mind if we called you to the front just for a moment, please, just to sit down and allow us to publicly thank you? Thank you. So, board members?
I think we are lucky to have had you for as long as we did, and we thank you for your service. Like Jason said, I don't know what we're going to do without you, but, we still have a few more months, so we'll cherish that time.
Thank you.
You've made understanding the budget process for the board relatively easy for us, which I know could not have been easy on your part, but your experience and your dedication to the board is very much appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
was just going to say, Carl, congratulations and thank you on behalf of the board and myself as well, included in that. I envy you. I just heard fishing and camping, and I'm not sure that anybody caught that unintended joke. Yeah, I guess you did. Lure you back. It was not missed by me, but again, thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for all you continue to do for the board and the people of California, and we wish you well in your retirement, and maybe you will be back. You know you're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say congratulations to you also, and ditto what Dr. Daniel just said. Like, you really have made this budget process a lot easier to understand, and I thank you.
Thank you.
And you have brought comfort to us board members when we see the budget report. We are comforted that you did your due diligence to dive in and give us the best numbers that you can, and that means a lot to us. Thank you for all the reports, and congratulations. And selfishly, we do hope we see you again.
I think I heard Jason's voice crack when he was sharing that news.
You know, to give you kind of a peek behind the curtain a little bit in how I came to this board and advanced through the board itself, I had a little bit of experience in every unit. But admittedly, the one thing that I was really lacking in was kind of the fiscal side of the board. I had no knowledge or education or anything like that. So when they, as a body, as a board, when you appointed me to this position, I mean, I leaned on Carl heavy when it came to the budget side of things, and any expertise that you think I have about the fiscal administration of this board in part goes to Carl and then to Liz, because without those two, I'd have none really, other than what was provided by DCA. And I can remember a number of times, you know, being in the workroom here at PTBC with Carl and having him explain it to me over and over and over again. And also having a very kind, you know, almost a delicate hand in telling me no for things. No, you can't do that. No, you can't have that. No, we can't buy this. No, that's not the way to do it. And just doing that extremely well.
Thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate what you all have had to say, and it's been a great pleasure to work for the board. The board's always been wonderful to me, and I really do appreciate it. I also wanted to thank Jason for being such a great EO. I told him, listen, if you ever leave, let me know, because I'm going to leave too. Because I really appreciate Jason, and I learned a lot from Liz. She's a very knowledgeable manager, and appreciate that. And the rest of the staff in general. I just have very close relationships with a lot of people here, so I'm going to miss everyone.
Absolutely. Well, cheers to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just leaving it open, you could always reconsider. I mean,
I'll think about it.
Within the Administrative Service Program, the other thing that I'd like the board to know is they've completed the recruitment process for the office technician position within the unit, and we'd like to welcome Julie Thau, who will be serving as the receptionist and kind of provide that central hub of communication, administrative support for the programs, mail distribution, answering the phones, those kind of things. But the relief that staff has been asking for months, and she has just kind of fit into that seamlessly and provided it. And I can speak for staff and all of the people that she works with that having her has been a great relief, and they certainly appreciate her being here. So, speaking of relief, we are still planning on starting the recruitment for our assistant executive officer, probably February of next year. Again, the move kind of has a lot to do with that too. I don't really have any place to put an assistant executive officer at this point. And there may be a recruitment for a position in the continuing competency services unit as well. So, and we're also looking for approval of some pending requests to the BCP process for an additional probation monitor and an outreach coordinator. So as soon as we get answers back for that, we'll definitely bring it to the board's attention. I don't want to, moving on to outreach, I don't want to really steal any of the thunder from the outreach presentation, but I would just kind of like to highlight a shift in our outreach efforts. We're going to continue to, check off schools off our list of, that goal of trying to get to every school by the end of our strategic plan. But we began to focus more effort into reaching out to other external stakeholders as well. Reaching out to CPTA for opportunities for collaboration, as well as healthcare networks like Kaiser, Sutter, and the UC systems, and exploring ways to open lines of communication with other regulators like the Department of Health, CDPH, the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education, and so on, and even our sister boards here at DCA. So I'm sure that April will have a lot more to brief the board on when it comes to outreach, but I just wanted to we're kind of leaning on that other foot a little bit more with a little bit more weight and looking towards that to kind of complete that objective 4.6 of our strategic plan of increasing stakeholder communication with other stakeholders. So on to the PTBC relocation. One of the reasons that you don't have a printed EO report in the materials this time is because down to the wire I've been waiting for some information to be able to share with you as board members about a construction plan for our new space. And I'd like to give you a very definitive timeline of when we can expect to start and complete that move. And as of today, I can't do that just yet. We have made quite a bit of progress. We're in the final stages of planning. We have a draft blueprint that I think is just about done, some minor edits. And I think we're at least close to having the construction plan down on paper. And as soon as I'm advised of that, I'll relay that on to you. I've met the contractors and have seen them in the building, doing assessments and surveys and that kind of thing. Management and I have worked with DGS and CalPIA and selected things like color palettes and cubicle configuration and what those things might look like. We're currently working on the logistics of the move itself. What's moving, what's staying, how many of this do we need, how many of that, and so on. So it's actually starting to get to that exciting point, though. The anticipation is starting to build. So I would just take the time again to kind of express management's appreciation for board staff because, while I've commended them on their work ethic and, maintaining quality during a very kind of cramped, time, I haven't really complimented them on their patience because I can only imagine how many times I've told them I don't know, and they don't beat me up too bad about it. So I appreciate that. It's been a long time coming, and as soon as I know a little bit more, I'd be happy to share it with you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Oh, and then the other thing I'd like to add is during the break at lunch today, I will be taking the members upstairs so that they can see the new suite. Ms. Ellaby.
You answered my question. Thank you, Jason.
Does the suite look the same as it did a year ago?
It does.
So as a board member who's not here every day and doesn't understand the process of everything it takes for this relocation, what is the process and what is it that's keeping us from moving forward?
Well, what was keeping us from moving forward was, being grouped together in a lease negotiation with 9 other boards and bureaus. Now that that lease has been finalized and we can move on past that point, we are actually making progress. We have the blueprints, we have all of those things. Finding a contractor and shopping that job out for bids and those kind of things can be very time consuming, but that's actually moving along at what I would consider a very sufficient pace. I'm satisfied with that. All of those other decision points when it comes to those blueprints, DCA Facilities has been very accommodating on coming out to us to say, here's the latest revision based on the feedback we received from you last time. What do you think? And they've even been open at that point to further amendments that we've kind of come up with on the fly. So again, that's why I say it's exciting now because I can actually start to see the movement. It's not just stagnant because of something as, mundane as a lease negotiation.
But it's still very difficult to give any timelines.
Yeah, and then just as a word of caution, when I do receive what we call a construction plan that has projected timelines, I would just, in advisement of the board, that they are just guidelines, that there are things that can come up in that construction plan that may create, to the benefit of the doubt, expediency, but more than likely delay.
What's the likelihood that staff will be there in a year?
Highly likely,
Highly likely?
yeah. If I had to limit it down to a year, I would say 2020. We will hit the target of 2020.
That's hopeful.
If that means July or this time next year of 2020, I'd still be right. And so I'm comfortable with that prediction.
I think part of a concern that I have is that, we've been asking for extra positions. We've been successful in getting some of those. We're all excited about the AEO. There's no place to put this. So we've got needs and we've got the okay to do these things, but we're kind of on hold because we don't have space, and it's a
There are some
challenge.
contingencies in place. So when I say that we're going to move forward with the recruitment of the AEO in February, I won't, regardless of what happens with the move and the plan of the move, we'll move forward with that recruitment either way. And if we have to stay within the confines of the suite while having an AEO, we'll figure something else out. And we have ideas. I mean, staff would say they're just going to kick me out of my office, and that AEO could have my office, which could work. But we're not going to delay that process any longer, regardless of what the construction plan might look like.
Right. Any other questions from the board? Any update, or will it come later on strategic plan?
I think strategic plan will be bringing it to you in that more formal presentation annually, like we did at the last meeting.
Okay.
Unless there are really significant milestones to report, I'll include them, but they'll be agendized in the EO report.
Okay. And lastly, sounds great that we're ticking off getting to a lot of our programs for outreach. Also getting to a different group of stakeholders, or several different groups, which is fantastic. And I know last meeting we talked about the challenge of how we can actually reach out more to the public. And I think that's still a challenge. But I also think that reaching out to some of the external stakeholders is a real opportunity as part of the public.
Exactly.
And the more people that you touch, the more they can turn around and share information with other people. So, yeah, I think it's great you've identified these groups to meet with.
Yeah, we're trying to kind of maintain a broad perspective that every person that we reach in our outreach is an opportunity to explore a different avenue. Who do they know? And getting contact information from them on the next possible person. So.
Okay. Any other further board comments or questions? Is there any public comment regarding the EO report? Okay. How are we doing on time here?
So we're right at the noon hour. I think we could do the legislative report and then break for lunch.
And do agenda item number 8 after?
I think time-wise that would work well.
Okay. So ledge report, agenda item number 9.
So October 13th was the last day for the governor to sign or veto bills, and all statutes will take effect January 1st, 2020. I'll go ahead and go through the legislative summary and give a brief update on each bill. AB 5, worker status, employees, and independent contractors. This bill, which will codify the California Supreme Court Dynamex decision using an ABC test to distinguish between employees and independent contractors, was chaptered. on September 18th and will go into effect January 1st, 2020. The next bill is AB 476, DCA Foreign Trained Professionals, was vetoed on 10/12/19. The veto message from the governor was, I am returning AB 476 without my signature. This bill would require the DCA to create a task force to study the licensing of foreign trained professionals and create a report for the legislature. Integrating foreign trained professionals into California workforce is an admirable goal. However, creating a new task force and a legislature report to accomplish that goal is unnecessary. The next,
Sorry, Mr. Kaiser, do you have any comment on that?
I think in part, every board and bureau that has the potential for licensing foreign credentialed applicants have their own kind of set of circumstances to have to deal with.
Yes.
And I think just from some of the board's current regulatory packages that are pending, like the performance evaluation tool, as a board, I think you're already making progress towards trying to expedite that process in and of itself. So having a task force put together to look at that could be a little bit too broad. Each board and bureau will have its own particulars, and in a task force setting, trying to come up with best practices, again, I think agreeing with Governor Newsom is admirable, but I do agree with his assessment of it being unnecessary. I think boards should be continually looking at obstacles to attaining licensure and eliminating them as they see fit.
Thank you.
AB 496, Business and Professions. This was a code cleanup bill of the BPC and was chaptered on 9/27/19. Okay, and AB 1076, Criminal Records. Automatic relief will require DOJ to review the records in a statewide criminal justice database on a monthly basis to identify arrest and criminal conviction records that are eligible for record relief and to grant relief for eligible records without requiring a petition. And this bill was chaptered on 10/8/19. SB 425, Healthcare Practitioners Licensees File, Probationary Physicians and Surgeons Certificate, Unprofessional Conduct. This bill was chaptered on 10/12/2019. And the next bill is SB 537, Workers' Compensation, Treatment and Disability. This bill was chaptered on 10/8/2019, and the board did send its letter of support to the governor, and a copy of that letter was included in the meeting materials. And again, this bill will take effect on January 1st, 2020.
Thank you, Brooke. Any board comment or question for the ledge report? Any public comment? Thank you, and thank you for including that letter. Okay, it's 12:03. Time to break for lunch?
I think so.
Okay, and what's a good time to come back? 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock is perfect.
Okay, we'll be back on record at 1 o'clock. Okay. Okay, we are back from recess, and the time is 1:15. We're moving to agenda item number 12, which is our Maximus presentation.
Good afternoon. Ooh. I'm Jenny Matthews. I'm the project manager for Maximus, and we manage the healthcare professionals diversion program. As of about a week ago, we were awarded the contract for another 5 years. The lights are just doing it on their own. It's okay. So we were, you still can't see it, so it doesn't matter if the lights are on or off. we were awarded the contract for another 5 years. We did a competitive rebid for the program, so we're excited to announce that. And the name of the program overall is changing from the diversion program to the recovery program under the Department of Consumer Affairs. We're going to talk about the impact of substance abuse among healthcare professionals and what is the recovery program. So I'm going to keep it pretty brief, and I'm open to questions as we go, or if you want to save them to the end, that's fine too. Okay, now it's not working for me. Maximus contracts with 8 health professional licensing boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs. It's going to be kind of like a disco. The largest group that we work with is the Board of Nursing. The Physical Therapy Board has approximately 17 participating in the program right now. We have a total of about 435 participants overall in the program. So these are all of the boards that we work with. Neither one is working. There we go. No, that's not. Sorry, it went straight to the end. Let me try to get this back where it belongs. It jumped to the end. How about if we just stay with the, can we turn the lights on? Do we know if they work? Oh, I tried that, but that wasn't working either. So we've held this contract since 2003 while Jason's being our tech expert. Nice picture. That's good. We've held this contract since 2003, and so we're very happy to have it renewed and continue working with the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm down to that one, number 5. The ghosts must have followed me in. We recognize that substance use disorder, formerly known as addictions, the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association have moved away from using that terminology, chemical dependency or addiction, and moved more into substance use disorder. And so that's the terminology that we use, we recognize. And individuals with substance use disorder, we also recognize that it's a disease process and it's not a character flaw or a failing of will. But these individuals are, and research has supported it, that these individuals are afflicted with a disease process that affects their brain, it affects the chemicals in their brains, and affects their ability to, they begin to have the trouble resisting the substance because the substance very powerfully acts on their reward centers of the brain and releases chemicals that trigger the reward center. So we recognize that, and that's the approach we take, and we do use a lot of evidence in how we work with them. So Maximus is not a treatment provider. What we're doing is providing monitoring and support for individuals diagnosed with substance use disorder, and they generally enroll in the program for 3 to 5 years. And so the treatment part happens usually at the early stages, and we monitor that piece and we get reports from treatment, but we're not the provider of the treatment. We're overseeing, it's case management, we're overseeing the whole process. So the risk for healthcare professionals is about the same, maybe slightly higher than the risk for the general public. And so we know that it's somewhere between 10 and 15% of individuals are afflicted with substance use disorder in their lifetime, and healthcare professionals aren't any different. But we do know that somewhere between 65 and 70% of individuals with substance use disorder relapse. It's a part of the disease process. It's not unusual for that to happen. But with the program that we're managing, with the level of oversight and accountability, we've been running a relapse rate of approximately 13% in the first 4 years. And we've learned that most of that happens during the first year, which is consistent with what is seen with the general public, that those first few months, those first 6 months to 1 year are critical in establishing that sobriety and establishing the patterns and the habits and the belief system that's required to be able to continue with the sobriety. Okay, I'm going to try this again. Not there. It's not letting me go. It won't go. What is it? Yeah, I did that, and that's how I lost the whole thing. My apologies. There we go. Oh, that's backwards. Okay. Wait, it's promising though. Okay, there we go. So when we put together our proposal for this rebid over the last 6 weeks, we pulled up some of the data related to each of the boards we work with. And so this is the data that we identified related to the physical therapy board's program. 79% are male that participate in the program. I don't know how that number correlates with the number of licensees and if it's weighted more toward male licensees in the physical therapy board. You don't think it is? Yeah, so that's unusual. Nursing, for example, is more heavily weighted toward female licensees, and we have a much higher number of female nurses enrolled in the program. So that's a little bit different with this board. But the other difference that we see with this board is that most prevalent drug of abuse is alcohol during the 12 months prior to coming into the program. Now, most of the other boards we work with have direct access to the narcotics in the healthcare setting. They're administering or prescribing medications, and so they have access to the opioids, which are kind of the center of the crisis that the whole country is dealing with. But we don't see that as much with the physical therapists coming in. We tend to see more with alcohol and marijuana and street drugs, kind of in that general sense, because they really don't have that access in the workplace to the substances. The only thing I can really think that a physical therapist might encounter in the workplace, if they're working in a hospital setting or a hospice or home care, they might encounter fentanyl patches, or if they're working in a home care setting, they might encounter some bottles of opioids. You know, people at home leave them on the kitchen counter or in the bathroom cabinet, and so it's easy to access them if you're in a home setting. But anyway, the bottom line of that is that we tend to see more alcohol and street drugs with the folks that are enrolled as physical therapists. And the age is younger than the average of the program overall. So the age group for this is 30 to 34. And we tend to see more in the late 40s, early 50s overall in our program, especially because, and we've seen other statistics that the nursing workforce is aging, and so that's reflected in the enrollment in our program overall. And nurses make up about 75% of the program, which is why that kind of skews the numbers more toward what we see with them. So the goals of the program overall, and it's supported by what's in the legislation, is to protect the public from healthcare professionals who may be impaired as the result of substance use disorders. And that's done by immediately intervening and providing rehabilitation services, help, and hope in order to return the individuals to safe practice. So the key is public protection and returning to practice in a safe manner. This is directly out of the statute, and the enabling statute for the Physical Therapy Board's program. And it's the intent of the legislature that the board shall seek ways and means to identify and rehabilitate physical therapists and physical therapist assistants whose competency is impaired due to abuse of dangerous drugs or alcohol, to that they may be treated and returned to practice of physical therapy in a manner which will not endanger the public health and safety. So that supports the mission of protection of the public. But I just really wanted you to know that it's the intent of the legislature when this was established to support that mission. So who is the program? The participant is kind of the center of the matrix, and we structure the program around what their individual needs are. So it's not completely an off-the-shelf program for everyone. It's not the same for everyone. So we have the participant, the boards, the providers of services, which are drug testing, support groups, the worksite monitors. We have diversion evaluation committee there. The physical therapy board uses a smaller version of that, which is an evaluation review of participants between the board representative and the Maximus case manager. But the process is the same. So we review their cases on a quarterly basis and look at progress in meeting their goals, and we look at whether they've been able to return to practice, and are we getting positive results, and are they compliant with the program requirements. So the process to come into the program is it can be a board referral, so those participants agree to participate in the program as part of their stipulated settlement for probation. They can refer themselves, although that's not as common. Sometimes we'll get individuals referring themselves thinking that they might get a kind of a jump on the process and be seen in a better light when they go for probation issues or the hearing for their probation. But the reality is that we don't treat anybody in the program any differently, whether they come in through the board or whether they come in as a self-referral. The requirements are the same. The program is voluntary, so they must request to join the program. So whether they're self-referral or whether they come in as part of their STIP, they've agreed to it. They've agreed to the terms, and they agree to come into the program as a voluntary participant. And in all cases, the board is aware that the participant is enrolled in the program, and the case manager works with the board on those issues. And as I mentioned, they're managed in the same way. Any questions so far? So these are the steps of the program, and I'm going to go through initially the program steps and then and the compliance and what that means. So the intake assessment, the individual contacts the program. We take some basic demographic information. We validate that they're eligible to be in the program, that they have an active license, that they're a physical therapist or a physical therapy assistant, that they live in California. We make sure that we have all of that verified, and then we conduct an intake with the case manager by phone. Our case managers are primarily registered nurses with experience working with substance use disorders and recovery. The intake assessment takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's a long process. We use a standardized intake assessment that's based on the Addiction Severity Index, and it's a long-standing tool. It's been around a long time, and that helps us to determine really what the needs are, what's bringing the individual in, how severe is their dependence on substances, what's it doing in their lives. So we look at a real psychosocial history. Then we send them for a clinical assessment, which is an in-person assessment, face-to-face, with a licensed clinician in the community. So we try to find individuals that are near their place of residence so they don't have to travel too far. They spend about an hour and a half to 2 hours with the participants as well. They're validating, we send them the intake assessment. The participants have done a self-assessment by this point, and we've started doing some of the drug testing. So they validate that the information that we have is consistent. So if the participant's telling them a changed story or they're not consistent with what they said in their own self-assessment, it kind of helps us to take a look at that bigger picture with them. At this point, they're often recommended to go into treatment. The case manager might recommend it at the point of intake. It depends on the case and what's bringing them in. So if we know, for example, an individual who has been using opiates heavily and has run out and is applying to the program to come into the program, we probably are going to recommend that they go into detox rather than delay or go into a lower level of treatment if we think that they're at risk of being in detox. So we make that assessment based on what their individual needs are. If it's somebody that had a DUI 3 years ago and they're telling us that they haven't used any substances since then, it's not likely that we're going to refer them into a high level of treatment. And then they see the clinical assessor, and the clinical assessor kind of validates that background and digs in a little bit deeper. And if they turn up a reason that we think that they do in fact need to enter into treatment, we'll again make that recommendation at that point. So it's kind of a dynamic process. The levels of treatment may be detox, inpatient, residential, or intensive outpatient. Could be any of those levels. And again, the other piece of it is that we work with them and with the treatment provider, who also does an assessment when they present at the door to determine what's the right level of treatment for them, what their insurance will provide, what they have. If they don't have insurance, what can they pay for? And we're looking at all of the factors to find out what's going to be best for that individual coming into the program. At this point, we require weekly communication with the case manager. We're checking in with them to see if they're understanding what the requirements are, how they're doing with complying with them, and how are they feeling about entering into sober lifestyle. And they're removed from practice until they're determined safe to practice. We have a requirement in California of the uniform standards for substance abusing licensees, and so those standards require that they're removed from practice for 30 days of negative test results. So typically that takes a little bit more than 30 days because they have to register with the lab vendor and we have to get all of the results back. So it's 30 days of actual testing. Typically takes about 40 to 45 days to get through that process. If they've come through that process, they've had negative test results, they've had an assessment with the clinical assessor and our intake, and they've begun attending support group and complying with program requirements, and they're determined to be safe to practice, they can return to practice at that point. If any of those are not falling into place, they may be held off from work for a longer period of time. We have them start attending community-based support groups, so we're talking about AA, NA. If they have a strong objection to AA or NA due to what many people feel is a religious nature, we have them go to other community-based support groups. There are some that are not affiliated with any kind of religious or spiritual structure, and so we allow them to identify if something that fits with their own belief system and works a little better. It has to be an abstinence-based program, though. So we require them to start attending those daily meetings, and they start attending a peer support group once a week, which is run by a clinician like a therapist, a marriage and family therapist, or a social worker in the community, and it's made up of other healthcare professionals diagnosed with substance use disorders. So they may or may not be in our program, but there are other individuals with substance use disorder that are dealing with the same issues as a health professional. They submit a written monthly self-report. That's for the entire time they're participating in our program. And after they've done those weekly check-in calls and they've been reviewed with the program manager for the PT board between that and our case manager, then they're permitted to call in monthly. But those calls are really a check-in to see, are they talking rationally? Are they able to talk about recovery and what that means to them? Are they able to describe for us any changes in their lives that might affect their recovery or that might present a stressful situation for them and put them at risk? And so we're looking at all those factors. You have a question?
So the daily meetings, 90 and 90, is that 90 meetings in 90 days?
Yes.
What happens if they miss
then they're considered non-compliant. So again, we look at that as an individual basis, and we work with the board on that. So if they have significant reason for that, they've become ill, or someone in the family has passed on, or something happens that's been a legitimate reason they could not make it to a meeting on that day, we'll work with the board on that. But the expectation is, and that's a pretty standard in the 12-step process, is that they go daily meetings for at least 90 days. Yes?
At what point in the initial assessments is a determination made that someone who's been referred may not be appropriate for the program?
So it can happen anywhere along that process. If the intake is occurring and we're thinking, yeah, there's something, this individual really doesn't belong here, we'll begin kind of talking to the board about that at that point. They usually know them. We work with Monty. I assume that you guys know Monty. So we work directly with Monty Martin, and we'll say, something's not right. We don't think that this participant belongs. We'll send them for the clinical assessment to get validation. It's much more effective to have that face-to-face assessment conducted. And then we'll look at it and, again, bring in the input from the support group facilitator that's been seeing them every week, make those decisions based on the assessment process. And it does happen. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And largely because the individuals with this board are almost 100% probation referred, so they've come to us because it's been identified that there's a pretty significant issue. So, but it does happen from time to time. Yeah. Okay. We enroll them in random drug testing right away. Our requirement with this new contract coming up is that they enroll in the program within 48 hours, and it takes maybe 5 days to get them their supplies and to get them fully enlisted in the program. So we typically get that first drug test conducted or collected within the first week to 10 days. They're required to check in daily with the vendor. We use a lab third-party administrator. They're called First Source Solutions. They are the third party. They manage the scheduling and the collection of results, but the actual drug testing is done by an analytical lab, and they're called DrugScan. And we have a pretty high degree of confidence in both of those entities. We've been out to do site visits at both of them several times, not just once, but they're on the East Coast. We also do hair and blood tests, and the hair tests are conducted by two other labs. One is U.S. Drug Testing Laboratory, USDTL, and the other is Omega. That's a new one for us, but it'll be starting January 1st. But we make sure that they're all appropriately credentialed and licensed laboratories, federally approved, and we have quality requirements for the labs. So we meet with them we meet with the administrator on a monthly basis and look at their quality records, and we're looking at turnaround times, and we're looking at accuracy, and we're looking at any collection issues and managing those issues as they come up on a monthly basis. When the participant checks in daily, they can use the phone, the web, or a mobile app. When they check in, it's recorded, and they get a confirmation number that they've checked in. When they're selected, they're notified at that point that they're selected, but they must test on that same day. So they have until midnight that day to test, and that's really to avoid any kind of tampering or maybe trying to flush their system, anything like that might affect the blood test results, or the drug test results. So they are required to check in between 5 a.m. and 8 p.m., and then they must test the same day that they're selected. The panel that we use in California is pretty extensive. The labs actually call it the California panel. We have very low cutoff levels, and we have a lot of substances. We have almost 40 substances on the panel, very detailed testing. For a comparison to that, if you look at the Department of Transportation testing, they have 7 substances on their panel. So we have a much more in-depth and detailed drug testing panel, and our cutoff levels, our detection levels are much lower than what the Department of Transportation requires. Because we're an abstinence-based program and we're looking at use, whether they're on duty or not, where a pilot or a truck driver may be able to use a substance or use a substance they've been prescribed when they're not on duty. But that's not the case in our program because we're really based on recovery. So urine testing is the most common, but we also use hair or nail testing and blood testing. So I wanted to mention about some of those tests because they're kind of new and very effective. So we use in the urine testing ETG and ETS, which is ethyl glucuronide and ethyl sulfide. And those are biomarkers or a metabolite of alcohol that will show up in the urine for several days after ingestion. So if an individual, the old days, what we used to do is look for just ethyl alcohol in the testing, and that would only show up for 24 hours or maybe 36, very, very, very short window of detection. But ethyl glucuronide and ethyl sulfide can give us a window of detection of about 3 to 4 days. So that gives us a more sensitivity. We also use PEth testing, which is phosphatidyl ethanol, which is also a metabolite that shows up in the blood. So if any of you are familiar with the hemoglobin A1C, it's kind of along those lines. So with an A1C, the sugar is attached to the red blood cells and shows up as long as those blood cells are surviving. And the PEth test is similar to that the metabolite of alcohol attaches to the red blood cells and shows up for approximately 3 weeks after the ingestion of alcohol. So we have a much more sensitive method of detecting alcohol use. Hair has about a 3-month window of detection, but we don't test for alcohol in hair testing. It's available, but not as reliable. So we haven't used that. And we use nail testing because, as you might imagine, we do have people show up that have shaved everything and there's no hair to test. And so we can fall back on nail testing. And if they've also cut their nails, we ask them to let them grow for about a week and a half, and that gives us valid nail testing. And the way it works, they don't pull the hair out. It's not that they don't pull it from the root. What they do is cut it at the scalp level. They take about an amount about the size of a pen or a pencil in diameter, and after the lab receives it, they cut it down to about 2 inches from the root end, and then they liquefy that and test that. So a hair test doesn't tell us that, yesterday or a week ago or a month ago, depending on where it is when they use the substance. It doesn't work that way because it's all blended together. It's just a yes or a no. There's presence of the substance or not. And really that's true of all the testing we do. So when we get those positive results, we can't say that they used, 40 tablets yesterday of something. It doesn't work like that, but we can see if their levels are high. We don't know if it's on the rise or on the drop on that bell curve, so we really don't know when the substance was used or what the amount was. So we really just rely on, we're an abstinence-based program and it shouldn't be there. And then we're not currently using breath. There's a SoberLink tester that does like a breathalyzer, and it's assigned to an individual. They keep it for 30 to 45 days, and we were testing it to see how it works, and it's actually pretty effective. They target you. If you have a positive result, it starts texting you to 15 minutes later you need to test, and you need to keep testing every 15 minutes until it comes up negative. And then it notifies the program in real time. So we're still considering that, but we're not officially using that in the program. And we're not using saliva or sweat or breath testing otherwise. Any questions about drug testing? That's a lot of information. It's a complex part of the program, but we feel very positive about the partnership we have with First Source and the program that we've developed. I'll let you know that we're looking at and very, very likely to move into a flexible testing panel in the next several months. And so we won't use that same test panel every single time. We'll flex it with different substances, but it allows us to drop the cost of the testing for participants. And I do have a slide later on that talks about the cost, but up until the end of this year, the drug testing is $62.50 for the test, plus the cost of collection. We are able to drop that January 1st. It'll drop down to $59 a test. And if we move into using the flexible panel, which allows us some variation, it's going to go down, it looks like, to about $52 a test. So that's going to be a big difference for our participants because the cost has been prohibitive. Yeah.
So is that one set price for any of the tests?
It would be a set price because they've averaged, we've looked at, we'll do this test 3 times a year and this test 12 times a year, and we've spread them out over the course of the year and mix them up, and then they'll be randomly scheduled, but then it allows for an average test price. So the participants won't know what they're being tested for at any given time, but it allows us to drop the price. Yes.
Anything they can purchase legally that could create a false positive from the drug test, like too much kombucha or something?
Kombucha is on our list of do not use because it is fermented, and we do have people coming up with positive testing when they're using kombucha. There are some soy sauces that are fermented and cause a positive test result. We provide participants with a list of substances that contain alcohol because there are also cleaning products and cold medications and a lot of other things that have alcohol in them that people don't really think about. But it's been extensively tested. They did show that the hand sanitizer, the Purell, which is a large percentage of ethyl alcohol in it, can cause a positive result, but the testing showed that it was only very briefly. So typically by the time they come in for their testing, they wouldn't be actively, using it to have a positive test result. And because we're using now testing for the metabolites of alcohol rather than anything that might be on the surface, that helps us to make sure that we're not picking up, if they use an alcohol wipe, which isn't ethanol anyway, but if they're using an alcohol wipe to do the blood test, that's not going to contaminate and give us a false result. There's been some talk of Wellbutrin causing a false positive for, I think it was methamphetamine. It might have been cocaine. I think it's cocaine. But because they use such extensive levels of testing, they go beyond just that initial screening and they confirm with more in-depth testing that rules out the possibility that those false positives would occur. So it's very unlikely to have a false positive. Yes?
Do you have any information for participants who are progressing well in the program but might have to drop off because of cost?
Yes. So we started collecting that data a couple of years ago. It came up as a question. We were audited, and the auditor asked us how much of that we saw. So we started collecting that data. And it's not that many that actually report that as their reason for resigning. I can't give you the actual number. I don't remember. But it's no more than a handful over the course of the year. But we are looking at that data. Any other questions? Okay. So to return to work, we have a pretty, as you know, and as we talked about, the part of the goals and the mission of the program are to provide safe return to practice. So for a participant to return to work, we need to make sure that they're safe. And so that involves they apply to return to practice once they've been approved. We look at their compliance with the program requirements, their negative drug test results, recommendation of the support group facilitator that's been seeing them every week, the participants' own report of their progress in the program and how they feel they're progressing. And then they can begin looking for a job. They're approved to look. So when they find a job and a job's been offered to them, they have to identify someone in the workplace that's a worksite monitor. And they have to give us a release of information to talk to the worksite monitor and the employer. And that's a requirement of those uniform standards. And the worksite monitor has to agree to be in this role, and we have a series of requirements for them. Provide us the contact information, and then we provide training to the worksite monitor what a relapse might look like, how to contact us, how to identify use of substances in the workplace overall, what to do if the individual appears not to be safe. So we kind of go through all of that with them in a training before the participant's permitted to return to work. And then they have to give us an org chart and a job description to show us that the worksite monitor is at least one step above on them in a supervisory role. If they're the owner of the practice, then we look for another equally licensed peer who's able to come in unannounced and do worksite visits to just to ensure that the individual is appropriately groomed and clear-eyed and speaking clearly, and take a look at their records, make sure that their practice is at the appropriate level of proficiency. They give us that job description to make sure it falls within their restrictions. That's not such a big deal for physical therapy because we don't have as many restrictions on them as we might on nurses. When nurses return to work, they're typically not permitted to access narcotics, but that's not an issue for the physical therapist, so there are fewer restrictions on their practice. We do restrict them from home health, though, again, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that there's often an opportunity to get a hold of medications in the home that aren't very well controlled.
Virginia,
Mhm.
so regardless if that is a term in their order from the board, that is something that your program actually puts in place, that they won't be able to go to home health?
Yes, and I don't think, to my knowledge, we haven't encountered anybody that didn't already have that as a board order. I think if we found that in the order it wasn't required, we would work with Monty on determining what was appropriate.
And then also, like for the worksite monitor, that's usually a term that we have, so that person that you are looking at from Maximus' point of view is usually the same person that we're going to also.
Usually, but not always.
Oh, not always, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we also work with Monty on that, but there are times, and they have to give us two different reports because the board's requiring one report and we're requiring another, but that also helps us with the validity. We're looking at that across.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we need an affidavit and an agreement. The affidavit just tells us that the worksite monitor meets the criteria to participate, that if they're in recovery, that they have at least 5 years of continuous sobriety. That's important for us. We don't want someone who's actively in the program or recently entered into recovery. We need someone that's able to identify slips. So that's as much as I have for return to work. Do you have any questions about work? Okay. Program costs. So the intake assessment, there's no charge. That's covered by the program. The clinical assessment is also covered by the program unless the individual fails to appear for their scheduled assessment. So if they are a no-show, we will bill them for the fee. But if they give us notice that they have to cancel or change, then they're not billed for it. The program administrative fees, and that's probably really tiny. Oh, yeah, you can kind of see it. So for the physical therapist, they're required to pay the full month program fee, the administrative fee. Some of the other boards subsidize the fee. And so for PAs, PTs, and osteopathic physicians, the cost as of January 1st will be $449 a month. And so that's plus the cost of their drug testing, which is why we're also trying to get that to come down a little bit.
Sorry, you said that on the previous slide, you said that the licensing boards subsidize
In some cases, yes.
for RNs.
Mm-hmm.
The RN themselves is only paying $25 a month.
Correct. And the board's paying the balance.
I'm astounded.
Yeah, so that means that the licensee population is essentially footing part of the bill, if that's the right model.
If for those three boards, PAs, PTs, and osteopathic physicians, the licensee is paying the full amount, the full administrative fee. which currently is 380, and as of January 1st will be 449.
But for the Board of Nursing,
Yes,
so the entire licensee population with their license fees are what's covering
yes.
we'll be covering $420
Right.
a month. And you said, how many nurses? That nurses make up the large?
Yeah, they're about 75%. I think we have about 330 currently enrolled.
Wow.
And then pharmacists, dentists, dental hygiene, and RDAs are at $100 a month, and so the board will be paying $349.
And the average length of time in the program?
3 to 5 years.
And veterinarians are just a one-time $2,000 payment.
Right.
So 5 months?
Oh, no, it
The
can,
payment? No, 5
actually,
months worth of payment.
they can,
Compared to
oh, yes.
5 months of full payment, and then the remaining 3.5 to 4 years are all covered by the network,
Yes,
essentially.
yes.
This is in regulation. Mr. Kaiser?
Nursing board, I believe part of it is in regulation, but more importantly, it's in the contract that is negotiated with Maximus by each of those individual boards.
Right. But the subsidies for the program,
So for some of those programs that are subsidizing, they have additional fees as part of the renewal to cover those costs. Sometimes they're delineated out, so you have the renewal fee for your normal renewal plus an additional $40, $50, $60 to cover the cost of the board's drug rehabilitation program. And I can't really speak to actual numbers, but the business model is would look that way.
But the subsidized fee is for each licensee,
Correct.
not just the
Not
ones who
just-
might need the service.
Correct.
Hmm.
And then in some of those contracts, it is just purely the board is encumbering that as part of the contract. And it's not actually delineated out, it's not defined in their renewal fee, it's just as part of the revenue model, as Kat said. It's just the board is paying for the drug rehabilitation program minus these individual monthly costs of $25 or $100 depending on which board.
I understand that this is slightly out of order on our agenda, but as an item for a future meeting, I would love to see a breakdown of this with what other boards are encumbering for their licensees who are enrolled in the program. But something to break this out.
Information be provided in the next probation monitoring report.
There you go.
Thank you.
Tell Monty?
Guess who's got working through the Christmas holiday?
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
You got a friend up here in Virginia.
Sorry for the diversion.
Well, I'll recover. Okay, so the other fees that the participants have, there's the support group fee and, it varies. Actually, it's more than $20 to $40 a month, depending on where they go. So there's a new term in the contract that becomes effective January 1st that the participant can identify a support group that's either closer to their home or more affordable for them, and that we will work with them to get them credentialed and on our list of providers to be able to provide a support group service. We have some other requirements for support groups, but they actually can be closer to $200 a month for the fees, because the groups for the non-nurses are run by licensed clinicians, so they're running those groups at a monthly rate. They also have a limit of 12 to 15 participants per group, so they shouldn't be exceeding that group size. And they need to have experience specifically working in recovery, substance use disorders, to be able to manage the groups with our participants. Their own healthcare costs, so they're responsible for whatever their healthcare costs may be, or what any copays related to insurance, or we try to help the participants find low cost or sliding scale treatment providers if they're not able to or don't have insurance or aren't able to provide the fee. And I'll tell you, some of the programs that are specifically for healthcare professionals in recovery can be $10,000 to $20,000 a month. So it's very, very expensive. So we work with them to try to find the appropriate treatment providers for them. The random drug testing fee I mentioned earlier is going to be $59, and we're trying to get it down to $52. And the collection fee is $35 if they stay within network. And I'll tell you that the other issue with that is that we are required to test any day of the year, including holidays. And it gets very expensive to find them a collector that's open and available on a holiday and willing to do an observed test collection. So that can run over $100 for the collection. So we're working very hard to get that into a reasonable place. We did meet with the executive officers of the board, the Substance Abuse Coordination Committee, last year, and requested the committee to consider allowing rescheduling on holidays, and that was not approved. So, yes?
When you gathered the data that the auditors requested about number of licensees who drop out of the program due to cost, did that include people who surrendered their license before they even entered the program due to cost?
I wouldn't know that, no, because I wouldn't be have access to that information.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to cost before I move into the completing the program? And we acknowledge and we recognize this is an expensive process, but we also know that it's successful. And we have a very low relapse rate because of it. We're really looking at anything we can do to help the participants. We years ago had a scholarship program where we would give them some funding for drug testing, but then the Department of Consumer Affairs legal staff felt that that wasn't appropriate because not everyone was able to take advantage of it. It was only provided to people that applied for it and could show need, and so then that was squashed. So we're not doing anything like that. So it's a balance, but I acknowledge that it's expensive. The transition period is 1 year before successful completion and after 2 years of compliance. So once a participant has been able to demonstrate 2 years of negative drug tests, good compliance with program requirements, they petition for transition. So they ask us to be permitted to enter into transition. They complete an essay, and we really ask for a thoughtful, insightful, they take their time on it and really look at their lives before they came in the program, even as children, what influenced the substance use disorder, what started the process for them. They come from a family with this issue, and we look at all of that along with where they are today, and really have them examine their lives and their progress in recovery. We also have them give us some letters of reference from 5 individuals that are close to them. We ask for reference from the support group facilitator that's been seeing them every week for the last 2 years. And then we evaluate that to determine if they're ready to enter into transition. Once they go into transition, we back off a little bit on the monitoring process. So they aren't required to go to support group anymore, so that saves them a couple $100 a month. And then they, after the first year of testing, and if they've been negative, we can also reduce the drug testing frequency. And in a public setting, I don't want to quite really talk about the numbers of frequency, but we are able to reduce that after the first year as long as they've been compliant. And they're not required to attend the 12-step meetings or the community support group meetings after that when they enter into transition, so they don't have to show us evidence of that. And then successful completion criteria. So after that year of transition, we continue to monitor them with drug testing and monthly check-ins and monthly self-reports. And after that year, and they were able to demonstrate a manner of living that is demonstrates ongoing recovery and support, negative random drug tests, no other evidence of relapse, and that puts them at 3 years in the program, then they successfully complete. So some people take longer, some people have relapses along the way, some people have other issues that have delayed their ability to progress, but typically 3 to 5 years is our length of stay, and maybe 3.5 if you allow for time to be reviewed by the committee and such. And then I pulled this off of the legislation, the Business and Profession Code, and it kind of at the last minute thought I would add this in, which is what the requirements for acceptance into the program. There are some others prior to this, like they must live in California and they must have an active and valid license. But they also must agree to undertake any medical or psychiatric examination ordered by the program. They must cooperate with the program by providing medical information, disclosures, and release of liability. They must agree to cooperate with all the program requirements, so we have what we call the recovery agreement. And each time there's a change, we issue a new recovery agreement for them. And if they may be denied participation in the program, if the program manager determines that they won't substantially benefit from participation, or if they're a risk to the public. So that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any other questions for me? Yes?
Just curious, what's the average number of drug tests that they typically take, say, every month?
So that's governed by the uniform standards that I referenced earlier, and that applies to all individuals in probation and in diversion programs. And the first year is required to be 52 times during that year, and it can drop after that, depending on a number of factors. So if they're not identified to have a substance use disorder, the frequency can drop. If they're, for example, if they're mental health, although the PT program doesn't allow for mental health, some of the other boards do. If they're not working in the field, the testing frequency can drop. If they've had that first year of negative tests, we can drop the frequency for every subsequent year. So, but it starts out at 52 times that first year. And it's scheduled randomly by a software program that the vendor has, so it could be 2 times in 1 week and not the following week. It varies because it's random. It's random by month and by year.
So if my math is correct, roughly $1,000 a month cost?
It's we've been just saying it's about $100 a test. So
Right, but I mean, with all the other fees.
Oh, all the
that's
other
up to about
fees.
$1,000
Probably, yeah. Yes.
We've had, I think I remember some petitioners in the past, to lessen their probation terms, who described stress, waking up in the morning at 6 a.m., making the phone call to see if they need a test. And if I remember correctly, even calling in to say I'm going to be in late because I have to go and test. But it sounds like there is a window up until 8 p.m. that they can go maybe later.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have a number of collection sites that are 24 hours. Now, we require them to test that same day, so going after midnight would be an issue, but yes, they can call up between 5 a.m. and 8 p.m. and test up until midnight.
Ben, you mentioned testing facilities are charging a premium for testing on a holiday.
Yes.
Where has that been challenged? Because they're enrolled in a process that is a 365-day-a-year process. They know that, they understand that, but yet they're charging more for a random test that happens to be on a holiday day. That to me just seems grossly unjust.
So challenged on what level are you referring, because.
On a contract basis, because they're charging an amount on Monday through Sunday, every normal week. That's one flat, one same fee. It's not different on Monday through Friday versus Saturday, Sunday, I'm assuming. But when the holiday comes, they get to charge more, twice the
So
amount,
it's
just
be-
because it's a holiday.
It's because they're using a different collection venue typically. So if one collection site is a 24-hour collection site, for example, there's one right next to LAX airport, it's a 24-hour site. They'll charge the same fee every time. It doesn't matter what day of the year.
Okay.
But some of the sites, and these are all independent entities, some of them are actually doctors' offices, chiropractors' offices that have done the training and are qualified to be observed collectors.
Okay.
So they may not be open on Sundays or holidays. And so the process is to, the participant has to, well, we look at the testing schedule in advance. We look to see that there's a collection site available to them that's open on that holiday. If there isn't, we try to work with the board to say, you know, we can't even find a collection site in the area. But as I mentioned, we asked the committee to allow us to waive that, and the answer was no.
Right. So, yeah, say, I need to be tested, and it's New Year's Day, and the regular places, nobody's open.
Right.
What do I do?
You call the lab, or you call, we have somebody on call 24/7, and we will have known in advance that you had been selected, and so we'll know where the closest collection site that's open is to you.
And how far does the closest site have to be? Or how close can the furthest site be away that I'm expected to get to?
So because we officially can't adjust the test schedule,
Right?
and the response that came back that day was this isn't for convenience, officially, there is no limit.
So I live in San Francisco.
Mhm.
For some reason, there are no testing sites available for me. And LA, the one at LAX, is the closest one. That's my obligation?
I don't want to get in.
I'm trying to just wrap my head around.
I don't want to, I don't want to, in a public forum, I don't want to get into that
I appreciate
conversation.
that, I'm sorry.
And maybe we can talk offline after the meeting. Yes?
When a candidate is deemed inappropriate for Maximus, do you have a slide on like what criteria you are assessing them by, or do you have, because we get these cases where somebody says they're inappropriate, but we have no idea what was measured to determine their appropriateness.
So if they're determined to be inappropriate for us, we would have it documented in the closure letter, and we would have it documented in their record. So I'm not sure which ones you would see. Who's saying they're not appropriate? The participant themselves, or have we determined them not to be appropriate?
It would be like in a proposed decision that would
Oh.
be provided by the DAG or something, but it's like a
Yeah.
sentence, nobody expounds on what made them
See,
inappropriate.
we haven't seen them by that point. We wouldn't see them until after that decision is made, and then they're referred in.
Okay. well,
The
this is-
participant gets a letter that describes why?
No, it's internal. The board gets that information, but the participant does not.
Judy, can you speak to the methodology that's used to determine if somebody's appropriate for the program?
I can but you have to remember it's once they've come to our attention. So within our context, we're looking at substance use, drug of choice, history of substance use, history of recovery. So I'll give you an example if it helps to clarify it a little bit. We get people that have ancient DUIs, and it was a one-time thing. And they can give us evidence that they recognize that DUI was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and they stopped drinking at that point because they realized that it impacted their lives negatively, and maybe they entered into a recovery program, maybe not, but there's no evidence of ongoing substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder. It starts with our initial intake assessment, then the clinical assessor that sees them face to face determines that, and if they get to that point and their drug testing has been negative, including a hair test and a blood test for alcohol off the top, we would talk with the boards and say, this person does not appear to meet the criteria to participate in the program. And we have a way to close them as clinically inappropriate.
And clinically inappropriate in these terms is this person doesn't have substance abusing tendencies.
Correct.
So not in a negative way, but really in the context of it's a positive
Right.
way towards the applicant or the commissioner.
Right.
Can you shed some light on the examination methodology that's used by the assessor of the clinical diagnostic evaluation?
Okay. It varies, and it depends on the case. And so they do, from time to time, use various tools that are available to them, psychological testing tools. Of course, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Standardized testing, right. So they may use that. We sometimes send participants for a 3-day intensive assessment. That is the participant's responsibility to pay for that, but it often sheds some light on what's really happening with them. In those cases, they typically enter them into a treatment program for 3 days where they're in the milieu with other patients, and they participate in groups, and they participate in higher levels of intensive assessments. And then we'll get those more standardized testing, personality testing, a lot of other levels of testing, and then they'll come back to us and say, this person is not appropriate or doesn't appear to have a substance use disorder.
How much does that cost?
It depends on where they go, so I don't know. And some of them are sliding scale. I mean, the number 10,000 comes to the top of my head, but I think that would be Hazelden, Betty Ford, or other professional program like that. Yes.
So sometimes what we used to find was clinically inappropriate for Maximus, but the reason why we are adjudicating the particular case is because there's multiple DUIs. So when we make an assessment on a case that says, hey, it's clinically inappropriate for Maximus, but we still have to make a determination on how do we protect the person, because the respondents, they start thinking, well, I don't have a problem, so the board can't do anything, but you've got 2 DUIs. And I just want to get some insight into, overseeing that probation periods. Do we still continue with biological fluid testing, those types of things? Because we still have a responsibility for public protection, and just because it's inappropriate for Maximus, will it still be appropriate for this person to keep them in a monitored environment?
You're going to have to look at each case individually, but my response the response off the top of my head is yes, it would benefit to continue to do some level of monitoring, because, and it depends on how far apart the 2 DUIs were, it depends on the level of blood alcohol, it depends on, the circumstances around the situation, it depends on a lot of things, but, and I would look at each of those cases individually, but, one time might be an accident, but the second time, did they learn anything from the consequences of the first one? And how far apart were they, and was anyone injured, and all of those things. So I think did they work while impaired? Was there any evidence of that ever happening? Because that's a big red flag. So you kind of have to look at all of those factors before you determine. But it would be appropriate for a period of time to do some biological fluid testing to ensure that the history you were getting and the assessments that you were getting were valid, and you're reinforcing that, and validating your own records to show that they remain negative, their testing continues to be negative. I would consider SoberLink at that point. That's the one that they do the blood test because it really kind of picks up randomly anytime. You know, those kinds of things. Go ahead. Yeah.
So my second question is just the total opposite of that.
Okay.
You identify substance use disorder within this person, multiple DUIs, present and DUI in space. And would you ever, I mean, from the law stats, the first year, if they get to the first year, okay, recidivism, relapses, kind of reduces on this program. But would you ever consider a probation period under 3 years, say 35 months? This is my own thing.
So we had, this was happening with the dental board where they were referred into our program and then they would finish probation before they completed our program. And because it was part of their stipulated agreement, they were asking for early release and to be closed from our program. In some cases, we closed them because they were compliant and they were negative all the way along. And in some cases, we determined that they would be a risk to the public if we closed them before they completed the program. And so it was sent back to the board for further review. So yes, we would consider, but what the osteopathic board started doing was writing into the stipulation that they can't complete one program before the other. They're either in probation until they successfully complete diversion, or they're in diversion until they complete probation, and keep the two consistent.
There are a couple loose ends in those last couple of questions that I just kind of want to touch on. So when a probationer is deemed not clinically appropriate for the Maximus program, the 1441 standards speak to that as that there's still a minimum that probationer is going to have to adhere to when it comes to abstention and bodily fluid testing. The bodily fluid testing bumps down to a much lower frequency, but it's still a requirement. We'd still probably keep worksite monitor in place. That's why it's a standalone condition in our work order. So that even if Maximus, they're not in Maximus, that we can still enforce worksite monitor, observe their sobriety on day to day and that kind of thing. The question as to whether or not in the first year of rehabilitation they make light year progress and leaps and bounds. The system is designed that the probationer can actually ask for another clinical diagnostic evaluation at their cost, and we would work with whatever the result of that clinical diagnostic evaluation is. All right, so if they're in the first year and they have a second clinical diagnostic evaluation, they were appropriate, they were clinically appropriate for the program, but in that second evaluation now, they made progress and it doesn't make sense. Theoretically speaking, it could happen. That based on that second CDD, they would what we call test out of the program for Maximus, but they still have to adhere to those 1441 standards to speak to that type of relation. Bonnie, did I get that?
Pretty much, and then also to address the issue of the probation running out before they're done with Maximus. The way we write our orders now, we put in there, say 3 years, unless you're in Maximus, then it's going to be the time it takes you to complete that program plus 1 additional year, so we can continue to monitor you without you being in that program. So we write the orders that way so that they're not finishing Maximus and looking for probation.
And the logic behind that language is Maximus is a very intensive program and really monitors that probation's lifestyle on a day-to-day with bodily fluid testing, support work, meetings, worksite monitoring, supervising physical therapists. It's expected for them to perform well during that period of time. Once that hand-holding stops and they complete Maximus, they get on the other side. We want that one extra year to see how they do on their own, left to their own devices before they're
I think I have just one more simple question. Why do you think the change from diversion to recovery?
I don't know. Jason, were you in on those conversations?
Well, there's a couple things. Diversion as a term in and of itself is kind of confusing.
It is.
So some people see diversion as diversion from discipline. if you can successfully complete this program, coming out the other side, you'll be unscathed. Your record is like for licensure will be unmarked. The public will be all unaware.
Which was the original intent of these programs in the
Right.
80s. Yeah.
And so, recovery program or rehabilitation program is just a much more accurate description of what the program really entails, especially for a board like the Physical Therapy Board, where we never really had a true diversion program. There was never a time where somebody could complete drug rehabilitation and come out the other side unscathed, right? Drug rehabilitation really rose to the level of discipline, right? There was a problem for the public good and the safety of our consumers that we had to intervene. And so if we're going to have to intervene, there's a mark on the record and that rehabilitation program is good.
Any public comment at all, or public questions? You think of anything else, David? No?
Did I leave anything out, Lonnie or Jason?
I do have a question for Daniel, just on the cost of the program. Are you concerned that our board's not more like the other boards in subsidizing, or are you more concerned that other boards subsidize the program for?
I'm amazed, I'm astounded at the cost of it. I mean, that gets me, I mean, thinking about if I was in that situation and what financially it's gonna do to me. In addition to all of the rest of, just the attorney fees and the rest of the things that are gonna impact my life that way. So that's part of it. But interested in wanting to know what other boards do. I would love to see the structure, the financial structure of how they operate, how they manage it. Yeah.
So-
It's a little bit of all of it.
If they're out of work for an extended period of time, they're typically eligible for disability, state disability. So depending on how long they've been working in the state and some of those other factors, but typically it's recognized by the state as a diagnosis that permits for state disability. So that gives them some income. And this board's participants typically return to work faster than other boards do. Nursing is, for example, keeps them out 3 to 6 months, sometimes a year before they can return to work. So it varies by board, but the key is returning safely to practice.
Do you know if professional insurance, malpractice type insurance covers, has any coverage ability?
It's a great question. I've never heard that. No one's ever even brought it up as a point of discussion. That's a great question. I don't know the answer though.
But the other professions, they qualify for disability
Yes.
too, right?
Yes.
It's really not a lot of money.
No, it's, what is it, 60% of their income, I think, yeah.
And the medical board doesn't participate in this program, is that correct?
Not currently. They, their legislation passed about a year ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, to authorize them to reconstitute a program. And they've been in the process of drafting their regulations, and eventually we'll put it out for bid. But they currently do not. And it's been since, I might be off by a year on this, but I think it's been since 2007? No, 2009. Since the medical board closed their program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
While we do some electrical work?
Yeah, so we could take a 10-minute recess to get ourselves back together.
Get the lights on.
Yeah.
Okay, the time is 3:15, we're back on record, and we just experienced some unforeseen technical difficulties. We've been in the dark for a little bit here, but we're back, and hopefully we'll stay back. And during the break, we do have some local students in the audience, and they came up and asked a few questions. So I would like to go into agenda item number 13 and continue the questions with the physical therapy and physical therapist assistant students. So we'd like to invite any students up front to come up and introduce yourself and ask questions of the board. Yes, come on up. Yeah, and just go ahead and make sure the mic's on and say your name.
Hello, my name is Val. I'm a PTA student at Sacramento City College. I apologize for dressing like this. I didn't know.
Oh, you're fine.
So my question is, can a PTA do PT work in terms of documentation and evaluation? And afterwards, the PTA documents everything. The PT could check, like if they did it right, stuff.
Yeah, good question. Who wants to take it?
Madam President?
It's because I was curious because I wanted to be to further my work into PT, but just get the training in the meantime as I'm in the clinic, just to document for them and have them check it over.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, in the state of California, a physical therapist has to do the initial examination and evaluation to determine a plan of care for the patient before a physical therapist assistant can get involved with providing treatment intervention. I know that there has been discussion in other places about potentially trying to modify when a PT assistant might be able to start taking some of the measurement data that is done in the initial examination. But in California, that's not the case. Only the physical therapist can perform those initial measurements and evaluation assessment before a PT can be involved with intervention.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
I'll dress better next time. Yeah.
Next.
Hi, my name's Justine. I'm a PTA student from Sac City College, and so I saw some of the Maximus PowerPoint, and I was just wondering what are some other main topics of interest that the board is discussing on this two-day meeting.
Mm-hmm. So did you get a copy of the agenda from the back of the room by chance?
Yeah, I have some stuff. I think
Yeah.
it's this.
So the agenda is broken up into 2 days, as you'll see, and some of the items, many of the items are pretty standard. We'll go over these things.
Yeah, I just saw a lot of codes, and so that's kind of where.
So the codes were those like the legislation report maybe that you were looking at, or yes. Oh, closed session codes. So yeah, there are certain agenda items that we have on the agenda for every meeting, and so one of them is closed session. So that's when we move out of open session and the public leaves, and the board members will discuss cases and deliberate on cases. For the most part, that's what we do in closed session. And then there are other items where we hear as a board from the staff members, and they give us reports on what's been going on in the day-to-day happenings of running the board. We also get a report from our executive officer, Jason Kaiser, who keeps us updated on certain projects or certain aspects of items that the board's working on. And so then we have special items. So usually Mr. Kaiser tries to do some sort of a training for us and the public. And so that was the Maximus training that we saw today. So we don't get that every time, but that's something that we've been curious to hear about for a long time. So that's why you heard the board members asking a lot of questions about what was going on. What else?
CPTA with SBPT.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. So typically, we will also hear from the professional organizations, so the California Physical Therapy Association, as well as the FSBPT, Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy. We don't always get representation, but certainly they're included on the agenda for when they can come and present issues that they might be sort of trying to address.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
To add to that, if there are items that you would like us to be aware of, you are welcome to recommend things that can be placed on the agenda for future meetings too. So we welcome any public comment for sure.
Yeah, you'll see in the
Part of the answer of my question.
Yeah. You'll see in the existing agenda right now, item 29 is public items that are not on the agenda. It's really the opportunity for stakeholders to come in and ask the board to consider certain topics, for discussion at a meeting to come.
My name is Emily. I'm a student at Sacramento City College as well. To my understanding, this is only the second time that students have been involved or talked to. So my question is, what is the goal of now taking this angle of establishing a relationship or communication line with students? Where do you see this going?
I can take that one. So while it's only the second time that we've done it as part of an agendized item on a board meeting, the board has a pretty robust outreach program, right? So right now we've touched about 12 out of 16 PT programs in the state of California, where we'll actually come out and do a presentation of the board, why it exists, what's our role, the difference between the association and the regulatory board, to try and get to our future licensees sooner, to provide them with that education so that they know what those laws and regulations are that govern their practice when they move forward. As the administrator of the program, I think that we've suffered from the lack of that kind of outreach program for a while. So some of our licensees might not be as up to date with the laws and regulations as they think they are, right? Laws and regulations in healthcare change frequently. And so as we address that change in the promulgation of regulation here, we do what we can to be proactive in providing that as an update to our licensing population. But I can tell from experience sometimes that doesn't really take in. Okay. So we're just trying to find ways to deliver that information a little bit more efficiently.
So in other words, it's kind of a way to put the board on our radar immediately.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
In two ways. One, for an applicant, we want to help you with the application process, and we want to make it as expedient as possible. So part of that presentation is really what that application process is, what are the things to avoid doing, what are the things to doing to prepare to kind of make it a quicker, more efficient process, and then that more general presentation of who the PTBC is and why we exist.
Right. Thank you.
You may find as you start practicing that you'll come across licensees who don't know much about the board themselves. As a licensee, I knew before I was a board member that I was licensed through the board and I got my renewal through the board, but even myself, I didn't know very much more about the board. So you might find quite a few people out there that you come in contact with who's in the same boat, and you'll be in a really good position to tell them and educate them a little bit more about who we are and what we do. But we're really glad that you came today and that you asked the great questions that you asked. And you're always welcome. We love to have students, and when you become a licensee and a member of the public, we love to have your participation. If there's some regulations that we're working on and you happen to be here, you can participate and help us draft that language, especially if it's in a field that you're more familiar with than we are for some reason. So thanks again for coming. Any other questions?
Can I add to that, Alicia?
Yeah.
Also, once you're licensed, you receive continuing competency credits for coming to board meetings, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we want the licensing population to engage in the process so much that we're willing to do those kind of things, right? We want to give you an incentive to participate here today just by being an audience member that will knock off continuing competency credits for your requirement for your renewal. For the promulgation of regulation, if we do a presentation for your school, this is kind of something I capture in the presentation. It's a public participation system. We're going to be writing rules based on statutes that the legislature wrote, and we want all of our stakeholders' input while we're trying to create or craft those rules so that we could take that input. They might have great ideas. We might have a rule that we want to put out, but we haven't, considered a certain perspective, and a stakeholder would. And they provide that input, and it actually changes the line of that particular regulation, if you will. An actual effectual change. We'd rather have it happen then, right? Participate in the actual promulgation before the regulation becomes effective. The part that I was talking about, the lack of outreach, is, in my experience as the administrator of the program, when we have those regulatory hearings to talk about new rules that the board is crafting, we have a hearing in a room like this, and not many people show up. Not many people engage or provide that kind of input back. And what happens is that regulation goes through unscathed as written. And then what do you think happens? Then people come out of the woodwork complaining about the regulation that they now have to follow, right? So the outreach for applicants is just the first step. We really want the licensing population to engage in the process more also. And there's a lot of different ways you can participate with the board. Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm also a PTA student. My question is regards to the bridge program where a PTA can become a PT. I know you guys have one in Ohio and Texas. Do you guys plan on expanding that?
So the interesting thing about where we are as regulators is the bridge program that you're talking about is going through CAPTE accreditation on a national level, right? And so the bridge programs aren't actually recognized in California yet. And it's a very new idea, right? So trying to determine how successful it's going to be is kind of hard to do at this point. We're going to let CAPTE kind of work through that a little bit more.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Just want to follow up on something that Dr. Rubina Amin mentioned earlier about welcoming you guys back whenever you want to come. We'll be back here in June and December of next year. Specific dates have been determined. They're in the calendar that we just adopted today, so you'll be able to check that out in the minutes. That'll get posted online. And we would far rather see you here on your own accord, being a volunteer, rather than being asked to come before us, which is a very different kind of situation. There are webcasts of previous meetings where we've had hearings with people who are seeking to reduce their probation or to modify the terms of that have been imposed on them because of something that happened. Pretty intense, but it's interesting to take a look at some of that stuff. And so that's online on our website. You can check that out. Don't be a part of it.
Just to plug that a little bit more. So if the board meeting dates are inconvenient and you can't actually attend them, you can always watch them live on webcast, except on days like today where we're having technical difficulties. And right now, we might be breaking in and out because of those technical difficulties. But for the calendar year of 2020, from March 25th and 26th, we're going to be at the University of St. Augustine providing a board meeting, and hopefully we'll have some of their students there. Back here for June 25th and 26th. In September, we'll be at the Guernica Academy in San Mateo, and then in December back here next year in 10-11. So 4 times a year. And if you can't actually attend in person, I would highly encourage licensees, applicants, stakeholders to go back to the board's website and go back through some of those meetings and watch. Because while we'll have one today, some of the things that are very beneficial for future applicants to watch are what we call petitions for modification of probation, where somebody who has actually been in trouble or even, unfortunately had their license revoked is now petitioning for reconsideration of this board to either get their license back or have their probationary order lowered in some way to accommodate their work. And it's a very dramatic process, courtroom setting. The 7 members of this board, an administrative law judge, an attorney general from the Department of Justice is coming and representing the people. The respondent or the licensee in this matter who's on probation or has had their license revoked is coming and bringing their presentation of why I need something adjusted. And it'll give you some insight into, one, sometimes how some of these things happen. What did a person do to get in trouble, to have their license revoked or to have their license put on probation? And then even what that process looks like, and even kind of line of questioning that you would see from the members asking, what did these people do to remediate, rehabilitate? What have you done in the meantime? Why should we give you your license back? Why should we give you a license with less restrictions? And it's something that, if you can't experience it in person, I would encourage you to watch on the website.
Did any of that spark any follow-up questions that you might want to ask? No?
Don't be scared. Application questions, examination questions. Dr. Dornan?
I'm Dave. I'm from the faculty from Sac City. A couple questions. First off, what is your guys' current pass rate as far as the state laws and regs exam?
Let's look in the materials here. So in each and every agenda in the materials you'll find in the applications and licensing reporting, we report on just those kind of statistics. So let me pull that up. So the jurisprudence examination for California alone. Yeah. 70%. And I think the point that Dr. Dornan is trying to make is the pass rate for the jurisprudence exam is actually lower than it is for the National Physical Therapy Examination.
Yeah. That was where I was trying to go with.
So the advice that I would give to students is don't sleep on that examination, study for it, right? And it makes sense to a certain extent. You're spending and investing quite a lot of time in learning the art and science of physical therapy or assistance in physical therapy. The pass rates kind of show that first-time test takers for the jurisprudence exam is pretty low because they never really picked up the laws and regs and studied them. But once they fail it and they have to take it a second or a third time, the pass rates spike up quite a bit. And so just a word of caution is study for that examination before you sit for it.
I would like to highlight that we have a study guide available on our website,
Yes.
should you need a resource available to you.
Yes.
That was going to be my next comment. My other question is actually just for the board. How much time do you guys actually spend in this role, say in a day, in a week, or in a month, on average?
It varies greatly depending on, when we're outside of meeting, we have four two-day meetings. So we're in them, and then we have a few hours of prep time before the meeting, reviewing the agenda materials. And then the majority of time outside of meeting is with reviewing case materials and voting. And that depends on the number of cases that get pushed through to us. In the month of October, I had maybe 12 to 14 hours total of case review.
Gotcha.
Because we had a number of cases to review. The month of November, I think, might have only been one case. Yeah. So it varies, but yeah.
Also, it depends on your role. I'm sure Madam President here spends substantially more time working with the executive officer for board business than perhaps a board member who doesn't hold a position of that much, authority. But on average, I'd say about 15 hours a month on a non-meeting month, and then if there's a meeting, 25 to 30 hours, I would say.
There are a few other things that might require board member work when it comes to collaborating with CPTA and attending conventions or the FSBPT or serving as a volunteer on one of the many FSBPT committees. This board next year will be entering into what we call the sunset season, where we have to write a report that essentially proves why we should exist and report to the legislature. And the compiling of that report is so comprehensive that we'll have a number of extra board meetings and require, the board members to do a little bit more work and just kind of, going through that report and making sure that it says what they want it to say, because essentially they're responsible for its craft.
Sounds like an accreditation review.
It's very much,
It's actually
very
nice.
much like. Yeah.
No, I'm going through the accreditation review right now, so yes.
And I'll highlight, it's not as bad for the board members.
Right.
But-
Right.
I think he's right.
Okay. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Fortunately, we're all the active members right now, we're on, involved with Last Sunset, so
Yes, that's a good thing.
hopefully it won't be.
Knock on wood. if
I'm
you're
not
looking
gonna,
at it.
I'm not gonna complete the sentence.
Any other student questions? Any other public comment? Board comment? Okay, thanks again for coming, very much. Yes. All right, agenda item number 8. We've got Consumer and Professional Associations and Intergovernmental Relations. A is FSBPT, and our current rep is Katerina, our delegate.
Thank you, Alicia. I don't have much to report since we were unable to participate in their annual conference in October. From what I've seen in their newsletters, it was very well attended. Unfortunately, we were unable to attend, but we look forward to being engaged in 2020.
Fantastic. Any questions, comments on FSBPT matters? Anything to add? No? Okay. And Department of Consumer Affairs report?
So as the board knows, there's been a transition in the directorship for the Department of Consumer Affairs, and I'm sure as part of that transition, they're extremely busy there right now. So they did forward on an update for me to provide in their absence, and so I'm going to read it verbatim because it is there's a few things in there I think that you'd be interested in understanding. This is in the voice of the new director, Kim Kirkmeyer, who is the former executive director of the medical board. She'd like to thank you for this opportunity to submit a written update from the Department of Consumer Affairs. You will find below an update on recent department activities, and again, I'm reading it, and we will forward it to you and include it in the agenda materials. It's an honor to be appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as the director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. The department has been her home in her entire career, and she looks forward to, I'm trying to kind of craft the language so it sounds better, but to working with Agency Secretary Podesta and all the boards and bureaus to improve consumer protection in California. In summary of her background, she started with the department 30 years ago as a student assistant at the Board of Cosmetology and has most recently served as the executive director of the Medical Board of California for the past 6 years. It's her initial focus as director for the future to concentrate on 3 things. One being client services and satisfaction, that every position within the department plays a critical role in providing efficient and quality services to the boards and bureaus so they in turn can provide the best experience to licensees to the public. Working smarter and together. The talent in these departments is infinite. With more creativity and collaboration between the boards and bureaus, she's confident that we can revamp the way we do business, and we have great teams, tools, and technology. And then finally, data, transparency, and action. Using data technology to better inform our decision-making so action plans are developed to drive down licensing enforcement timelines and provide measurable achievements. With these things in mind, her main area of focus will be the timeframe for processing regulations, obtaining fiscal reports for the department, decreasing timeframe to perform investigations, working on ADA compliance issues, and ensuring all legislation is implemented by the boards and bureaus within the department. A director's quarterly meeting will be instituted, a meeting between the director and the DCA executive team and DCA executive officers and bureau chiefs. The next meeting will actually be held next Monday, December 16th. These meetings provide a forum to share departmental goals and provide updates from DCA's executive team relative to the projects and matters facing the programs. These meetings are also an opportunity for boards and bureaus to discuss with the DCA executive team and each other important issues that they may have encountered. And an executive team update. It's bittersweet to report the recent departure of some of our colleagues in the DCA executive team, namely Chief Deputy Director Chris Schultz, who was appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as Chief Deputy Commissioner at the California Department of Business and Oversight. Mr. Schultz's last day with the department was Friday, November 1st, 2019. Also, Deputy Director Chris Castrillo's last day with the department was Friday, November 22nd, 2019. Mr. Castrillo is exploring opportunities for the coming year. Deputy Director Dennis Cuevas Romero's last day with the department was Friday, November 15th. Mr. Cuevas Romero accepted a position within the American Civil Liberties Union. And Assistant Deputy Director Karen Nelson, who you're familiar with, last day with the department was Thursday, October 31st. Ms. Nelson accepted a position as Chief Impact Officer with the American Leadership Forum, the Mountain Valley chapter. Mr. Schultz, Ms. Castrillo, Mr. Cuevas Romero, and Ms. Nelson have been integral members of the DCA executive staff, and their contributions to the department will be dearly missed. We wish them well in the next chapter of each of their careers. Board Member Resources Center online portal. The DCA Board Members Resource Center has been revamped and relocated to the DCA public website. The Board Member Resource Center is an online tool designed to provide information and resources to current board and committee members and to those who are interested in becoming appointed to serve as a board or committee member. Examples of items offered via the Resource Center are informational tools regarding required trainings and Form 700, the DCA Travel Guide, the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, the board meeting dates for each individual board and bureau, and appointment information for individuals interested in an appointment to a board or a committee. We encourage you to visit the refreshed, newly designed page, and we welcome your feedback. A new publication called DCA We're Listening. DCA's communication division has been working to find ways to improve the interactions of the public with DCA and our boards and bureaus to help them understand how to bring their concerns, comments, accolades, and complaints as effectively as possible. Toward that effort, the Communication Division created a simple visual how-to guide for Californians who want to approach us. It's called DCA We're Listening, and it lays out everything the public needs to know about giving their feedback to DCA. Our boards and bureaus, from public comment etiquette to meeting mechanics, this guide is the perfect primer for approaching the podium. The guide is available in both brochure and poster form, and the brochures work great at the welcome table for any public meeting and anywhere else interested parties may see it. The poster will hang in DCA's 2 Sacramento hearing rooms, but additional copies are available for purchase, laminated with foam backing to go in any room where you can hold a public meeting. If you would like more information, please contact the Communications Division. We actually have a copy that will be here tomorrow. Thank you again for your valued partnership. Please let us know if the department can be of service to your board. If you have any questions, feel free to contact DCA Member Relations at memberrelations@dca.ca.gov. All the best. Kimberly Kirkmeyer, Director, Department of Consumer Affairs.
So does she have any supportive staff?
Yes. Aside from the deputies that serve for Board and Bureau Relations, who they're recruiting positions for now, she has her executive team. She's still recruiting for a chief deputy, but there's deputy directors over admin services, deputy directors over facilities, so on and so forth.
Okay. Any board questions, comments? I guess I'm thinking about whether or not we need to ask for help filling vacancies on our board.
Yes, and have, and do. That is one of the things that she's very well aware of, as well as the appointment secretary at the governor's office, is that there are vacancies that have created quorum issues for some other boards and bureaus. And as we have experienced another vacancy recently, I think our priority on that list has certainly gone up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any public comment? Okay. Thank you for that report. And how about CPTA?
Tamika Island with the California Physical Therapy Association. Good afternoon. No formal updates today from us, but I have been asked to formally invite the board members to participate in our 2020 Student Conclave meeting, which I do see is calendared on the board's documents, as well as our 2020 annual conference, which is slated for Anaheim in the first weekend in October. We would love to have you exhibit or partner with us in some capacity at either event. And I'm here and happy to answer any questions that you may have today for me.
How was the Tri-State Conference?
It was, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Attended and received.
It was very well attended. It was, I believe, our second well-attended conference. A little over 1,200 attendees overall, which is fantastic. We received very positive feedback from our attendees. They appreciated the programming, the national speakers that we brought in-house, and it was hosted in Las Vegas. So a fun time was had by all. We partnered with our Nevada and Arizona chapters. So the three of us collaborated to bring all of our prospective members and as well as members in. So we oversold our exhibit hall. So that was very exciting as well. Thank you for asking. Thank you. Any other questions?
Perhaps as you develop your itinerary or curriculum for the upcoming meeting, please let us know how we can be involved or contribute.
Absolutely. I spoke with Jason yesterday, and we'll be sure to communicate with him a number of options for you to participate if that's something you're interested in.
Thank you, Tamika.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, agenda item number 10, rulemaking report.
So before we get started, I would like to introduce Clay Jackson to the board, and if maybe Clay would like to step up.
Mm-hmm.
Clay is a member of our new regulations unit at DCA Legal, and he'll be working on some of your regulations. And he already is working on some of your regulations, I should say. Do you want to say a couple words, Clay? Or?
Sure. My name's Clay Jackson. I have been an attorney for 30 years, and the past 14 of which I've been working on the industry side, working on regulations for workers' compensation, for self-insured groups, which I was specifically involved in. And so I was on the outside looking in and got to throw rocks instead of catching them. Now I'm very excited to be on the reg unit with DCA Legal. I get to work with Michael on two different groups, and so two different boards, and it's nice because our office is very collaborative, and I don't feel like I'm taking away from Michael, just the burden off of him, so he can better handle your board duties, so that you know regs take a lot of time, and in order for Michael to handle them, he might have to take a week or two off of working on your other duties that he might not have because he has other boards. So I feel like I'm able to help Michael help you. So anyway, I look forward to working with all of you.
And just to briefly add, as we go through that transition, Clay and I are really using it as an opportunity to sort of divide and conquer and get through some of your backlog. So you've already seen some of that move. You're going to see that continue to move quickly.
And by the way, I did show the students that were here what Brooke's going to go over, and they were very interested in seeing the examination criteria and the standards. So you might be able to get some input from them in the future on that.
Fantastic.
And I told them to call Brooke. Thank you.
I think his timing is just right, especially since we're approaching a sunset review year. So we're excited to have you, Clay. Welcome.
Okay,
So on page 42 of the meeting materials is the 2019 rulemaking update. And we did create a new tracking form which splits the process into 2 phases. It splits it into the initial and final phase, which better reflects the new review process. The steps in the initial phase include pre-review by legal and review by agency before the rulemaking file is publicly noticed. The final phase are all steps that occur once the 45-day comment period has ended and the final rulemaking package review begins, which will go to agency, finance, and the Office of Administrative Law. So the steps highlighted in burgundy represent the tasks that have already been completed. Those in green show where the regulation is currently at. And those in gray reflect the steps that still remain in the regulatory process. So it kind of shows the map of where we're going. The first item on the tracking form is the examination passing standard. And we are in the initial phase, and the board staff forwarded the pre-review of the initial rulemaking documents. Those documents include the initial statement of reasons, the notice, and proposed language, and that was sent to DCA Legal on June of 2019.
And let me just check in. I've had that one a little while. That is a very good example of what I just stated. You're going to be seeing that moving in the next, certainly before the next meeting, probably a lot sooner than that.
And the next item on the rulemaking tracking form is the disciplinary guidelines. And that package was modified at the June 2019 board meeting. And that was modified to address changes that were necessitated by AB 2138. So this initial rulemaking package was submitted to DCA Legal for their official initial review in June of 2019. The next item on the tracking form is the satisfactory documentary evidence of equivalent degree for licensure, also called the coursework tool. Initial rulemaking documents were submitted to DCA Legal for pre-review in November of 2019. The next rulemaking item is the performance evaluation tool for foreign educated physical therapists completing a supervised clinical practice in the United States. Board staff forwarded the initial rulemaking documents to DCA Legal for their pre-review in November 2019. The next item is the AB 2138 regulations package regarding substantial relationship criteria, rehabilitation criteria for denial and reinstatement of licensure, and rehabilitation criteria for suspension and revocations. And that was sent for initial review to DCA on October 2019. And the other 2 additional items on the tracking form, we'll be addressing those during presentation of the rulemaking calendar, which is agenda item 11. So we'll be discussing those. Were there any questions on the rulemaking report that I can answer for the board?
Just a comment, this is just so much easier to digest than the little arrows.
Good.
So glad you like it. Thank you.
Good job on this, Brooke.
Thank you.
If there is, I agree, wholeheartedly, that the presentation of that information is so much better than what we were providing before. But if there's anything from a board member's perspective that you'd like to see added to it or something like that, feel free to mark it up, anything that you'd like to see changed differently, and we'll try to incorporate it for future. We'd like to make that intended for the audience so that it can be consumed by consumers and licensees and applicants and board members alike. And like I said, compared to what it was before, Brooke has made a lot of headway in visually showing and also simplifying and making it easier to understand.
Mm-hmm. Can you please remind me, is there a timeline for each box, or is it just arbitrary?
So for the initial phase, no, and that's kind of a new process. But with the addition of a second regulatory attorney, I think timelines will start to establish themselves as far as an expectation. Mm. But once you get into final phase, there are legislatively mandated timelines for public notice and that kind of thing. Yes. But the promulgation of regulation is a very difficult process to work through, as language changes and it's crafted, and as feedback is received and adjustments are made based on that feedback, that can prolong the time. And you'll see in this report, there are 5 different packages in the works, all at the same time, and all sitting, on DCA Legal's desk, kind of gumming up all the works. And so, as they're able, like Michael said, as they're able to divide and conquer and work through this, I think you'll start to see packages move much faster.
Any other board comment or question? And public comment? Thank you, Brooke. So we're ready to move to agenda item 11? Okay.
So Government Code 11017.6 requires that all agencies submit a calendar to OAL with all anticipated rulemaking timeframe, and including proposed timeframes, which helps them plan their workload for the year. So we've attached a proposed 2020 rulemaking calendar for the board's consideration. We did carry over all but one of the rulemaking items from our adopted 2019 rulemaking calendar. So beyond what I just presented on, we included the retired license status, again, on the 2020 proposed calendar. We did omit the continuing competency regulation, just because we have so many regulations right now that we're working on. We wanted to be realistic and, kind of focus on what we have already working on. So we will be addressing continuing competency regulations at a future date and working with staff and researching that and being able to propose language to the board, hopefully early 2021. So Schedule A of the rulemaking calendar is on page 48 of the materials, and that would just be, we obviously don't have anything on there because there's nothing that's been enacted, nothing that Governor Newsom has signed this year that we're going to be promulgating regulations on. So all of our listed regulations will be on Schedule B, and that of course includes the coursework tool, the examination passing standard, the PET, disciplinary guidelines, the retired license status, and then our 3 AB 2138 regulations.
And just a few words in support of the calendar as it's presented to you. Keeping those 5 packages, obviously, because they're already in the works, but the addition of, at least the choice or decision to make, keeping the retired license status as something that we want to start in the year 2020, as opposed to CC, which realistically we're looking at as a little bit more of a lift that we're going to put off till 2021. Retired license status, if you remember, while this board had an authority already written and we were relying on, it had a sunset date labeled on it because of a new general provision that was passed for the whole of the Department of Consumer Affairs. And so while we want to promulgate regulations off of that new general provision, we're in this kind of limbo period of intent almost. We're working off of old legislation, working towards new. And so there's a little bit more of a high priority in doing those in the year of 2020 as opposed to continuing competency.
Makes sense. Any board questions or comments?
So we're seeking a motion to adopt the 2020 calendar.
So moved.
I can second.
Motion by Ms. Ellaby and a second by Dr. Dominguez. Is there any further board discussion? Is there any public comment? Roll call vote, please.
Alicia Benet-Amen.
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez.
Aye.
Daniel Drummer.
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby.
Aye.
Tanya McMillian.
Aye.
5-0, motion carried to adopt the 2020 rulemaking calendar.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. Anything else?
Just a recommendation. So for agenda item 14, to further the conversation on the elimination of the pocket license from the last board meeting, I'd ask us to table that conversation until tomorrow so we can work out some of those those technical difficulties, because that presentation is in PowerPoint form, and we all saw how that worked out earlier today.
I agree.
So if we could table that till tomorrow, it would give us some time to try and work out alternative means.
I agree. We'll table that agenda item number 14 until tomorrow, which leaves us with public comment that's not on the agenda. And we do have one more item for closed session that maybe we can go into since it's the end of the day. So we'll go into closed session. It's 4 o'clock, and when we're done, we'll just come back and look out the door and then make an announcement that we are going into recess for the evening and coming back tomorrow. Okay?